I've spent the last 2 weeks of my life testing literally everything there is to test on this new Valguero Ascended map, and in this video, I'm going to share the 40 biggest and most important tips and tricks about the map that I've learned. This video includes an entire early game guide, an entire resource guide, an entire loot farming guide, important information about how to get some of the more difficult to obtain but important creatures, a full caving and artifacts guide, and a boss guide that makes this boss a complete joke, even though it is one of the trickier bosses that Ark has ever released. It's also worth noting that before I go further in the video, nothing I'm talking about in this video requires you to pay for extra DLC. Everything is free for access. If there's something I'm talking about that requires you to pay for DLC, I will give you an alternative option that works just as well, if not better. I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Let's get right into it. I hope you enjoy. Going over these regions in order, first off is the small islands. This is a very basic, pretty safe area of the map. You get a good amount of resources, you get a good amount of early game tames. It is worth noting that you're right next to the Redwoods, so you do sort of need to stay on the beach here. If you go too inland, you are going to get screwed by something. But it's a very decent spot, especially if you're not trying to go super quickly through the early game. The beach zones do vary because they're very far apart, but the beach zone 2 and 3 are near the chalk hills on the beach right next to it, and beach zone 1 is sort of near the small islands. The boreal forest zones all suck, don't even bother. They're definitely okay, but in my opinion, there's much better choices. The chalk hills zones are a really important spot on the map to visit, but they are kind of a pain in the ass for the early game, specifically when you don't have any gear. You get outsped by a lot of carnivores in this area too, so if you're on foot, you can get punished pretty easily for making a mistake. The jungle zones are okay, and they're definitely not super dangerous, but I really wouldn't recommend them. There's not too many benefits for actually picking this area compared to other regions. The redwood spawns are actually not that dangerous compared to other redwood spawns on other maps, but there's really no benefit to spawning here. It's just kind of a high risk, no reward situation. The tundra zones are actually a pretty good spot to spawn if you want to have a difficult start to the game. You can get a lot of late game resources pretty quickly, and you can get some solid tames pretty quickly as well. With that being said, there is a ton of aggressive creatures like saber-tooths, which can be a pain in the ass. And do not spawn in the snow zones, they just suck on this map for spawning. There's really no reason to spawn here. There's a lot of friction when it comes to getting the early game resources you need to get going, and there's not that many great early game tames here. Now that we've gone over all the regions and sort of the overall map layout, here's what I like to do in the early game to get progressed quickly and easily. The way I like to play the early game on Valguero is spawning at Beach 3. The reason I spawn at Beach 3 is for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's really easy access to every single resource you need in the early game to progress. Secondly, there's really easy access to all the early game creatures you need to progress to get to the late game very, very quickly. The third reason is there is zero threatening creatures on this entire beach. The most dangerous creature on the beach is a Dilophosaur. Combining these three reasons on top of the really easy abundance to keratin, which I'll talk about in a second, this is by far the best spot to spawn on the entire map. You can farm up to metal tools by farming these river rocks incredibly quickly. You can use the dead Carbonemus for the keratin to get a saddle for a PT. You can knock out a PT really quickly. And if you get lucky enough to have an Equus spawn, which is pretty common from my experience, you can use the Equus to knock out the PT when you don't even have Tranks yet. Yes, there's also rock carrots on the beach, so taming these Equus is incredibly easy. By the time you hit level 37 by spam crafting cooking pots, by the way, there's no explorer notes on this map, so the XP thing doesn't really matter for where you're spawning. You'll easily have a Pteranodon saddle, and then you can go fly around, get the late game resources, get the late game creatures, and you're set right at the start of the game. This is one of the best spawn points on any map in Ark, including all 13 maps they've released. I see people constantly talking about spawning on the small islands or the boreal forest. It's just not as good. The creature progression on this map I sort of covered on the last point, but let me just go through it very clearly here. If there is an Equus on this beach zone 3, grab an Equus. It'll make it easier to get resources in the early game and to knock out a Pteranodon. If you don't get lucky with an Equus, yet again, there are rock carrots on the beach, so it's really easy to tame them. Just skip right to getting a Pteranodon, then use that Pteranodon to go get Wyverns and Deinonychus. Both are really easy to get on this map because the Wyverns only consist of fire and ice Wyverns, so they're really never going to kill you. The most dangerous Wyverns to deal with when you're trying to steal eggs are the lightning and the poison Wyverns. The fire and the ice Wyverns are really easy to get away from. And for the Deinonychus, you're spawning right next to the chalk hills, so going and getting Deinonychus eggs isn't even out of the way for you. While you're in the chalk hills, you can also look for Ovis. Ovis spawn here all the time, and it's a really easy way to get mutton to go tame other creatures that progress you like an Argy. I'll cover stealing the Wyvern eggs and the Deinonychus eggs in more detail because there are some things you can do to make it even easier, but just know for now, this is generally the best creature progression on this map. Like I mentioned earlier, there's Carbonemus on the beach that give you a ton of keratin when you farm them, as well as a lot of spoiled meat and hide, which is really valuable in the early game. But on top of there being dead Carbonemus that give you keratin, there's also dead Ichthyosaurus on the map, which gives you a ton of organic polymer. On screen now you can see my beautiful MS Paint drawing showing the primary location for the dead Carbonemus. This is basically on the entire stretch of the beach that is right next to the chalk hills. Really convenient location because you need to go to the chalk hills for so many different things. And then now on screen you can see the Ichthyosaurus locations on top of the Carbonemus locations. Luckily enough, if you spawn in Beach Zone 3, you're also spawning really close by to the Ichthyosaurus. Once you get your Pteranodon up, you can easily go fly across, farm these Ichthyosaurus, and get a ton of organic polymer. With these two types of corpses nearby as well, you're basically never going to run out of spoiled meat in the early game for narcotics. You're going to have access to more than enough hide for all the early game crafting requirements. And you can revisit these spots later in the game, especially the Ichthyosaurus, because polymer is super valuable throughout the entire playthrough. The Carbonemys are okay to revisit as well as a way to get some cementing paste, but in my opinion, there's better ways to farm chitin that I'll get into much later in the video, as well as better ways to farm cementing paste. Before I continue with more specific map things, let's talk about a couple of commands and one setting that is really important to use on this map. First of all, for the setting, Light Bloom should be off when you're playing this map. Light Bloom is a pretty terrible setting to have on in general in my opinion, but on this map specifically, it is ridiculously bad. It basically blinds you every time you go into the Aberration Zone or the Underground Ocean, because there's so many crystals in these areas that are ridiculously bright, especially compared to the surrounding area. Turning off the Light Bloom doesn't make it harder to see, it just makes it easier to see because you're not blinding yourself every time you're going to these spots. R-Top Fog Space 0 is also a must-have when you're underwater especially. I generally like using this command whenever I play the game, it makes the entire map easier to see. But in the ridiculously dark underwater portion of the map especially, it is so important to have this on. It is really hard to see when there's fog. I also recommend using Gamma 4 or 5 when you're underwater and when you're in the Aberration Zone. One thing that's worth noting is when you're in these underground areas, it actually is substantially easier to see when it's daytime outside. The day-night cycle really impacts the visibility in these areas. But even during the daytime, the underwater section is ridiculously dark, and during the nighttime, both these sections are dark. The Grass.SizeScale Space 0 command can also be used pretty effectively if you want to be able to see the rock carrots in the Chalk Hills biome, but this command makes the game look worse in general. Unlike a map like Extinction where the ground clutter was ridiculous and completely tanked optimization, Valguero is pretty optimized, so you really don't need to turn off grass unless you're looking for something like carrots. While we're on the topic of early game still, I do think the Deinonychus is basically an early game tame with how easy it is to get. On screen now you can see all the locations Deinonychus eggs can spawn in the Chalk Hills biome. And to get these eggs, it's actually really simple. Once you have that Pteranodon I was talking about earlier, all you have to do is go fly over a nest, see that there's a nest with an actual egg in it before you dive down so you don't waste your HP, and then literally once the Deinonychus take a couple of steps away, just fly down, grab the egg, get back on your bird, and fly away. If there is a cliff nearby to where the nest is, it is ideal to drag the Deinonychus off the cliff so you don't get bled and then have to wait to heal up your Pteranodon. But even if there isn't a cliff and you have to tank a bit of damage, tank the bit of damage, get the eggs, raise up the Deinonychus, and you're good to go. I would just keep cycling this pattern until you find a level 200 plus egg. Pretty much any Deinonychus that's a high level is going to be strong because of the bleed it inflicts, the high speed it has, and the really good other mobility tools like the mini glide and the jump and the climbing. It's just a great creature in general, so getting a solid level 1 is all you really need. Yet again, its best feature, which is the bleed, is a percent-based thing. The level doesn't matter for that, so you really are getting value regardless of the Deinonychus you get, and it's very easy to get them. It is worth noting that the best stat on the Deinonychus in my opinion is HP, so if you are looking to get a really good stat on this, aim for HP. This will make the boss fight a lot easier. I'll explain that at the end of the video yet again, but this is something you maybe want to look out for. But the main thing that's important here is you get the imprint for the 30% buff, and you just get an okay one so it's not incredibly squishy. Before I get into the resource guide, I'm going to cover a couple of key locations on the map that you need to know about. First of all is the two Aberration entrances. The main entrance that I definitely recommend is at 38.358. This is the giant crystal entrance right off the water, and it's by far the better of the two entrance options because it's just a lot safer to go down this way. You don't run the risk of getting dismounted from your flyer and then dying of fall damage. Getting back out of the Aberration Zone is much easier in this way because you don't need grapples to get out or a climbing pick, and it's also more central to the map, so you're more often going to go here than the other spot. The other spot is the secondary waterfall entrance, which is at 32.3, 92.6. It's a very vertical entrance to the cave. It's more out of the way on the map, and it's kind of a pain in the ass to get out of the Aberration Zone from this entrance, so I don't recommend it. Inside the Aberration Zone, another key location you need to know about is the entrance to the red/radiation zone at 35.6, 65.1. There is another entrance available, but it's actually so much worse that I'm not even going to mention it. This main entrance is safer, it has a wider opening, and there's a ton of resources like red gems here that are really easy to farm. The other underground area on the map is the Underground Ocean, which has three entrances. The first is the main entrance at 45.334. You can see me panning around here to show you the surrounding areas, and this is the main entrance because it's centralized to the map. It's also just closer to all the relevant stuff underwater like the deep sea loot crates, because all the deep sea loot crates spawn around where this entrance is and not around where the other water entrance is, which is at 63.6, 73.2. If you do use the secondary entrance, you're just going to have to go down a long path to get to the underwater content because there's really nothing down this entire long path besides you having to travel. The third entrance is at 32.1, 9.3 in the waterfall cave that's in the tundra biome. This entire cave looks awesome. It is a really good entrance because it's right next to the underwater content as well, but you're gonna have to cryopod and throw out an underwater tame if you want to go down this entrance for the underwater content. Without further ado, let's get into the full resource guide for Valguero. As always with these tips and tricks videos, if you already know where all the resources are, feel free to skip to the timestamp on screen now, or just go through the video chapters that are in the description if you want to skip through. I totally get it. Without further ado, let's get into the metal portion. There's a ton of locations you can farm metal on the map, but my favorite spots are the following. One of my favorite spots is at 54.4, 68.7 on this entire mountain region. This actually runs down further across this bridge as well, but the mountain region has the most metal. 37.7, 76.9 is an even taller mountain with even more metal. 49.3, 64 is a bit of a smaller area, but there's very dense metal spawns here, as well as a lot of obsidian and a lot of oil, which I'll talk about later. 83.3, 34.4 is an enormous mountain region in the Redwood area. This has a crazy amount of metal, crystal, obsidian, and oil, so it's a great spot to visit. And 53.4, 55.1 is this stretch of land here with a ton of metal on it. There's no other resources here, but it's a great spot to farm. All of these spots have an incredible amount of metal, and they're pretty centralized on the map, so they should be good for what you're needing when it comes to farming metal. There's also a ton of other spawns on the map. On screen now you can see the spawn locations of every single rich metal vein on the entire map. In case your base is really far off to the side of the map, maybe one of these spots will be better for you than the ones I shared. Admittedly, there is a ridiculous amount of crystal, so me going through specific spots isn't going to save you that much time, but the best crystal spots on the map are the following three. At 84.3, 18.8, there is a ton of crystal in this purple crystal-y area that's under this cliff. At 41.9, 73, there's a ridiculous amount of blue crystal on this mountain, as well as a good amount of metal and obsidian. And at 77.3, 70.9 in the Chalk Hills, there's a crystal cave, which has a really good amount of crystal in it as well. On screen now you can see the entire crystal spawn map for Valguero. It is ridiculous how much there is on the map, like I said before, but those spots are the ones I go to the most. Obsidian doesn't spawn as regularly as metal and crystal, but there are some really good spots for it. The way I'm approaching how I place these obsidian spots is sort of just trying to give you one spot nearby where you're living, regardless of where your base is. A lot of these good obsidian spots are on the corners of the maps, unfortunately, so I just sort of took a spot from every corner and took one spot in the middle. At 37.7, 76.9, like I mentioned earlier in the metal section, there is an insane amount of obsidian here. It's a really great spot to farm it. And like I mentioned earlier as well, at 49.64, it's also a pretty good spot for obsidian, but not amazing. In terms of less centralized areas, 6.7, 5.5 has an incredible amount of obsidian and an okay amount of metal and crystal too. This is really out of the way in the snow biome, but if you live in this area, it is the best spot in the game for obsidian by far because you don't have to travel that far for it. At 14.2, 75.2 at the top of this mountain near the Wyvern Trench, there's a lot of obsidian here. You're not close enough to the trench to actually aggro wyverns, so don't worry. The most dangerous thing here is UDs, and that's not too bad. And at 75.4, 70.2, on top of this whole Chalk Hills mountain region, there's a great amount of obsidian and an even higher amount of metal. Just a great spot to farm if you're living in this area. And at 83.3, 34.4 on that giant mountain region in the Redwoods area, there is some obsidian here as well. So that should give you one decent obsidian spot for every corner of the map and some in the middle. On screen now you can see the other locations for obsidian, but from my experience, these other areas aren't really densely spawning for obsidian, so it's not as good to farm here. I know I mentioned farming those dead ichthyosaurus corpses earlier in the video is a really good way to get organic polymer, and while that is a good way to get some, the best way on this map to get it by far is by farming the organic polymer flowers that come from Aberration. These spawn in a couple of locations on the map, and it's highly recommended that you farm these with a dire bear. You can see the locations for dire bear spawns on the map now. The easiest location to farm it is at 80.4, 16.2 in the Redwoods inside this giant tree trunk. And they also spawn on the outside and on the path leading into the spider cave at 74.42. And they also spawn all over the place underground in the radiation zone like I talked about earlier in the video. In case you forgot, the entrance to that area is 35.6, 65.1 in the underworld. The bear is the best for farming in all three of these locations. You will need a hazard suit if you want to farm it inside the red zone, and if you're in the spider cave, I recommend bringing Megatheriums, Deinonychus, or something else to kill the boss just so it's easier to farm. I'll get into how to kill that boss more effectively later in the video. But definitely use the dire bear to farm these flowers. It is a ridiculously good way to get organic polymer, and it's been the best way to get organic polymer in the game since they released Aberration and Evolved. For silica pearls, there's three main spots I like besides beaver dams, which yet again I'll get into in a second. At 18.2, 89.4 in this small lake in the snow biome, there's a lot of silica pearls down here, and there's penguins in the middle so you can farm polymer at the same time. And then there's two sections in the main body of water on the map. One is at 43.2, 31.5. All around this area, there's a ton of silica pearls, a ton of oil. It's a really great spot to farm. There's also a lot of metal down here. So if you bring a Dunkleosis, you can get a good metal and oil farm at the same time. And at 43.5, 51.7, there's also some pearls. This is my third favorite spot to farm pearls on the map, but it's not bad. In terms of black pearls, there's a couple ways you can farm them. First of all, deep down in the radiation zone, you can go down there with either a whip or just manually farm them by hand. There's a ton of black pearls everywhere in this area. It's obviously a dangerous area of the map, but black pearls are a late game resource, so it is a really decent spot to farm them if you're strong enough. It's by far the most densely spawning area for black pearls on the map, but there is one other good spot in the deep underwater zone, which I'll show you now. All along this strip of basically magma rock under the water here, around 41.2, 26.9, there's black pearls on both sides of this ravine looking thing, and there's also black pearls on the edges of it as well. There's a ton of black pearls that are harvestable on both sides, so this is another good spot, and it's much easier to access this than the red zone, especially if you don't have hazmat. For green, blue, and red gems and other aberration resources, all of them can be found in the aberration zone. You can see all three spawn maps on screen now for where all the red gems, blue gems, and green gems spawn, and these are all useful for crafting different aberration resources. It's worth noting really quickly because I forgot to mention this earlier, if you don't have the Aberration DLC installed, you're not going to be able to craft the Aberration engrams, which are really useful on this map. So make sure if you're playing it and you want to take advantage of the very solid Aberration items, for example the climbing pick, which can be helpful for a certain cave that I'll talk about in a second, and the glider suit, which I'll also talk about in a second, that is useful for a different thing, just make sure you have the Aberration DLC installed as you're playing the map. For chitin/cementing paste, you can yet again just go get beaver dams. There are a ton of beaver dams on the map, and I'll show you where they are in a second here. But the easiest chitin and cementing paste farm is at 34.5, 51.4 if you exclude beaver dams. I tend to use a megatherium, go into the cave, maul through all these creatures really fast to get a ton of chitin, and then use that to go craft cementing paste. This lava cave is useful for a couple of things including drops, but I'll get into that later in the video. For now, just know that it's really good for chitin/cementing paste farming as well. There's two ways you can go about getting oil on the map. The first way, which is more common, is just manually farming it. The best spot on the map to manually farm it, by far, is the oil cave. Oil cave is located at 49.19.5 on the edge of the tundra biome, and you can see by the background video, there is plenty of oil in here for you to farm. The other way you can farm oil around the map manually is you can either go back into that water I showed you earlier near the silica pearls, or you could go back to those mountains I showed earlier, because a couple of the rocks, you can see an arrow pointing to one of the rocks right now so you know what it looks like, do actually give you oil as well. What I generally do though is I take advantage of the oil rigs that are all around the map. My favorite spot for placing oil rigs is at 49.364. I showed this earlier as a really good metal and obsidian spot, but it also has 4 oil rigs in a very close vicinity. I mean, you can see me placing all 4 on screen now. They're really close together. The giant mountain I showed in the Redwoods has at least 2 or 3 as well at 83.3, 34.4 if you'd rather go there because your base is closer to that spot. But a combination of farming oil either in oil cave or in that underwater area, as well as having a couple of rigs, is more than enough for an entire playthrough. I know I've mentioned beaver dams a couple of times. Here's the 2 locations for them. One location is at 54.74 all around this lake, and the other location is at 39.12 all across these rivers in the tundra biome. At 39.12 in the tundra biome, you're going to find a lot of smaller beaver dams and a ton of beavers and dangerous threats around the area. This makes grabbing beaver dams a little bit more annoying, especially trying to popcorn out all the stuff every time, but it is still doable. And at 54.74, there's a ton of giant beaver dams and a couple of small ones as well. If I only have time for going to one of the 2 spots, I usually go to 54.74 because it's safer and has more giant dams. But generally, I do like to go to both spots and stop at the lava cave on the way through to grab drops. That's the benefit of having a cave like Lava Cave in the middle of the map that gives you good drops, because you can pretty much always stop by it whenever you're traveling around the map. For honey, Valguero is pretty unique, so I made it its own section for this video. On screen now you can see the spawn locations for giant bees around the entire map. These giant bees are spawning absolutely everywhere, but the catch is I haven't seen any regular beehives, which is strange. This actually plays in your favor because it's much easier to tame the giant bees when you don't have to deal with the entire beehive stage of it. So all you really need to do now is throw on some ghillie, put 1 bug repellent on, and then just run up to the giant bees that are flying around the map and give them simple kibble. You can then turn them into beehives, of course, once you tame them, and then place it at your base, and you've got honey for life. Carrying on with the more niche resources, sap is also a bit unique on this map. Instead of there being just the one way to get sap on this map, usually the one way is you just put a sap tap inside of a redwood tree and you get sap over time, there's actually a way to manually harvest it as well. In the area around 55.2, 37.9, you'll see these dead, rooted out tree trunks on the ground, and if you harvest these with a chainsaw, you will get a ridiculous amount of sap from them. I still prefer, generally speaking, using the automatic farming method because it just makes it easier not having to go out of my way to farm sap. If you are going to passively farm the sap out of the trees, I do recommend taming an Archaeopteryx, which passively grabs the sap out of the tree sap tap over time. On screen now is an image of where the redwoods are on the map, just as a reminder from earlier if you are looking for the trees that you can actually harvest sap out of. The last important resource on the map that I'll talk about is rare flowers. You can see the spawn locations for rare flowers on screen now, but honestly, you'll get enough rare flowers out of the beaver dams to have more than enough for an entire playthrough. Rare flowers are best farmed by Therazinos when you pump delicate harvesting into them, and you can see the spawn locations for Therazinos on the map as well on screen. Therazinos are going to be really helpful for something later in the video, so stay tuned. If you want to know where a resource is that I didn't talk about, leave it in a comment, I'll answer as fast as I can, or somebody else will probably answer for you. Now let's go through how to get the trickier creatures on the map, starting with rock drakes. Rock drake eggs can be found at 42.959 in the radiation zone all throughout the rock drake trench. This area requires hazmat. It's pretty dangerous because there's reaper queens at the bottom of it, there's Karkinos all around the place, there's obviously rock drakes defending the nests, and there's other stuff like nameless as well. With that being said, Valguero doesn't make it very difficult to steal rock drake eggs. The radiation zone is not that deep at all, and there's a couple of very effective ways to go get these eggs. Basically, every viable option for this involves you just moving very quickly. Cosmos are available in the Aberration Zone on this map. You can see the spawn locations for Cosmos on screen now if you do have the DLC. That obviously makes it really easy to just go down, grab an egg, Cosmo out, and then glider shoot out of the area. The way I usually do it is I'll just get a couple of Deinonychus, run down there with the Deinonychus, bleed out and kill the rock drakes because those are generally the most prevalent thing that's stopping you from getting the eggs. Going down, grabbing an egg, climbing back out of the trench, and then running away. Deinonychus are really fast, and once you get a rock drake egg, getting more rock drake eggs afterwards, even if the rock drake has a low level that you got, is so much easier because the rock drake is a very maneuverable creature. It's kind of the same idea as a wyvern. Once you get a wyvern egg for the first time, it's much easier to go get more wyvern eggs because the wyvern is strong enough to tank a couple of shots, and they're just as fast as the wild wyverns with better user control because obviously you're going to path better than the AI. While we're on the topic of the red zone, the reaper is also a pretty difficult thing to get for the first time if you don't know what you're doing, so I'll cover that now. When you're trying to get a Reaper Queen, what you want to do is you want to trap it. Regardless of if you only want one baby or if you have multiple players trying to get impregnated, you're going to have a foundation under the Reaper and keep it stuck so it doesn't burrow after impregnating one player. Even if you only want to get one baby, it's still worth trapping the Reaper because if there's a foundation under it, there's a lower chance it's going to glitch out. Reapers love doing that. The general design I go for is a 3x3 foundation, and then I place doorways on all the sides of it, basically, and then have a ramp up so the Reaper can run up, fall into the trap, and then you can easily get it down on low HP. With that being said, Captain Fat Dog does have an excellent trap for Reapers if you want to check that out. It's a little more specialized and works insanely well as well. I've used it in the past, but it's harder to describe in a video. You want to use a light pet while you're fighting the Reaper as well. This can come from either the Cosmo projectiles or any of the 4 light pets we all know and love. This basically tanks the resistance of the Reaper and makes it much easier to get to low HP. And once it is on low HP, just stay nearby it, stay on the back of a creature if you want, and just wait until it impregnates you. You just gotta sit nearby, close enough where it can get to you with the impregnate, but not close enough where it can hit you with all of its basic attacks. I generally like using something like a tanky Rex or another tanky creature that's pretty tall so the Reaper can easily impregnate you. And once it does impregnate you, there's a couple of things you can do. First of all, make sure you have hazmat the entire time. If you ever take a tick of radiation damage while you're impregnated, the baby will immediately die. But also, right when it impregnates you, make sure you spam med brews because it puts you down to 1 HP and you really don't want to die. It's just kind of annoying to go back and get your stuff afterwards. Once your baby is about to pop out, what you want to do is you want to put a ton of meat onto your character and then just stand there inside of a metal box. The reason you're standing in that box is basically when you give birth to the Reaper is going to come out and it's going to attack you. When it attacks you, if you have enough meat on you, it'll basically slot cap itself or put a lot of meat on itself to the point where it's encumbered. So then when you respawn after it kills you because it auto-harvested your corpse, you can just go in, it can't even move, you can claim it safely, and then once it is juvenile, it's a basic creature you raise like anything else. For wyverns, the coordinates for the Wyvern Trench are at 1473, and the way this layout works basically is outside there's ice wyvern eggs, and on the inside there's fire wyvern eggs. What I recommend doing is going down, grabbing any ice wyvern egg you can find because they're much more easily accessible, flying away, raising up an ice wyvern, and then you're good to go to steal any wyvern egg you want. If you have something like a rock drake already, you can also just use that and then go steal whatever egg you want. But I do find that going down with a Pteranodon into the deep fire wyvern part of the trench to try to get fire eggs is a bit difficult unless you have a good stamina Pteranodon. And just to add to my resource guide from earlier, sulfur does spawn at the bottom of the Wyvern Trench, and from my understanding, this is the only location on the map for sulfur, so good luck. Now that I've gone through some of the more difficult creatures to get on the map, it's worth noting that the Deinonychus, Rock Drakes, and Wyverns can all be used for extraordinary kibble, and they're all breedable creatures as of 2025. Using higher level kibble for everything is possible because you can use higher level kibbles for lower level kibble requirements. And in my opinion, it's more convenient to just set up an entire farm to make extraordinary kibble and use it for everything than it is to make 6 separate farms for the unique requirements that all the different kibbles have. This is more of a preference, but definitely use one of these creatures for your extraordinary kibble because you're just multitasking. Before I get into how to farm loot most effectively on Valguero, I want to shout one thing out here. If you're interested in joining a manhunt style Ark event over winter break, where you'd basically be in a group of hunters trying to kill a bunch of creators trying to beat the game, where there's a prize pool for the people that actually kill the creators, join the Discord in the first link in the description and go to the event announcements chat and then react with a horse to that message. I'm trying to gauge how many people are interested in it. I think it could be pretty fun. I already have a lot of the stuff set up for it, so I'd appreciate you checking it out if you're interested. Also, if you're not subbed to the channel, this video took me a week and a half to make, and I'm trying to get to 30,000 subs by the end of the year. I have a bunch more Ark content coming soon, so I guarantee you won't regret it. The easiest spot to farm loot on the entire map with good quality is in the lava cave at 34.5, 51.4. I mentioned this cave earlier in the video when I was talking about how to farm chitin, but this cave is incredibly good for farming loot. Flyers are allowed in here, so it's really easy to go in. There's 3 drops literally right there when you fly in, so they're incredibly easily accessible. And there's really nothing that threatening about this cave besides the lava, so as long as you don't fall into the lava, you're going to be good to go. I've also noticed that on top of these 3 drops being here that all give really good quality loot, you can also fly out and then fly back into the cave within a couple of minutes, and usually the drops will respawn. For most drops in Ark, it takes 30 to 60 minutes to respawn, but I've noticed double spawns happening here where you can basically farm it, leave, go back, farm it again, and then it'll only be a 30-minute timer after that. Just makes a good spot even better. Another spot I like to farm loot on this map is the deep sea loot crates. On screen now you can see the coordinates to the 10 deep sea loot crate locations. These are all in the deep underwater biome like I talked about earlier in the video. And this entire deep underwater biome is really not that dangerous at all, so it is pretty safe to go down here and farm these drops. In my opinion, this is the 3rd best loot farm on the map if you don't have DLC. If you do have DLC, then obviously the Drakeling is one of the best options, but excluding that, I think this is the 3rd best way to get loot. It's a little more out of the way, it takes a while to farm all 10 of these, and the drop quality is good, but not as good as the best quality loot on the map, but it's certainly one of the best ways to get loot. With all that being said, the best way to farm loot on the map by far is the red zone crates. Inside the radiation zone, like I've talked about so many times in this video, there's a ton of drops spawning both in the Rock Drake Trench and around the entire area outside of that as well. These drops are a little bit inconsistent in terms of quality, but when you get a good drop here, it is the best type of drop on the map to be farming. Once you have something like a Rock Drake, it's really not that difficult to maneuver the entire biome and get a lot of these drops safely. It is worth noting that about half the drops do spawn in the Rock Drake Trench itself, which is pretty dangerous because there's Reapers, but if you're on a Rock Drake and you're moving quickly, it shouldn't be too bad, and the drops are worth going for. One more way that's decent for farming drops on this map is killing the Broodmother mini-boss outside the Spider Cave. The coordinates for this cave, yet again, are around 7443 on the map. This cave is one of the more important spots on the map because there's 3 artifacts inside the cave, and the Broodmother outside gives good loot. My recommendations for killing the Broodmother, if you want to kill it, are to either just use really strong creatures like something like a Giga or a Karka because it can easily do that, or use something like a Deinonychus to bleed it, or a Megatherium to use the Uranios nearby to get buffs to kill the Broodmother very easily. This mini-boss is not that strong, it's really easy to deal with, and the benefit to killing it outside of just getting the loot from the Broodmother mini-boss itself is if you kill it, it's much easier to farm with the Dire Bear for the organic polymer flowers all around the Spider Cave entrance and the outside of it. I usually leave Megatheriums around the outside of the Spider Cave and I just run in, kill it every once in a while, and then get the stuff and leave. It doesn't take that long to kill it, so when you're flying by, maybe it's worth it. Before I get into the entire caving guide, this map has some pain in the ass caves, so I'm going to show you the entire Grendel boss requirements for every single tier of the boss so you know what artifacts you actually need to go for before I go through this. It's worth noting that my recommendation is absolutely to fight the alpha version. You get access to some really important engrams for killing the alpha boss compared to the other 2 difficulties. You get about double the amount of element, and honestly, if you use the strategy that I figured out for fighting this boss, all 3 difficulties are about the same in terms of challenge. One more thing I'll go over before we get into all the caves is the good caving creature options on this map. I will preface this by saying I think pretty much every single cave on this map is most optimally run on foot. Just the way these caves are designed and the ability to use cactus broth plus bug repellent makes you pretty hard to see for most threats. I'll get into more detail about this in a second. But if you do want to use creatures, I love the Deinonychus for these caves. It's a small creature, it's able to take out everything because of its bleed and its high speed. The Baryonyx is good for certain caves, the ones that have water involved, definitely it's pretty good for. And I like the Pyromane specifically for one cave, but obviously that is paid DLC. On screen now you can see the spawn locations for all 3 of these creatures if you want to use one of them, but yet again, pretty much every single cave I'm going to go through here, I'm going to show you how to do it on foot, because I just think it is better to do it on foot for most caves on this map. Just getting this out of the way first, the Artifact of the Pack, Immune, and Strong are all in the Spider Cave, and this cave is basically a labyrinth. If I wanted to show you how to do this, it would take me 15 minutes to go through the entire cave, so I'm just going to give you general advice, and I'll link down below a full guide for this cave from Jonah X, really awesome Ark YouTuber by the way, definitely go check him out. It's just not worth doubling the length of the video to cover one cave, but here's the advice I would give you. First of all, you can easily fly past the Broodmother mini-boss outside the cave and just fly down to the entrance with a Pteranodon or something and then cryopod it. The Broodmother mini-boss is completely optional. You do not need to kill it to go into the cave. In terms of things you need to bring cactus broth. Cactus spawns in the chalk hills everywhere, by the way. Bring bug repellent. Bring a handful of gas masks. I like 3 or 4 generally. You could bring more if you're not certain about how fast you can get through the cave, but definitely do not run out of gas masks in the cave. I like bringing 1 set of flippers, but it is optional. And then just bring med brews and a set of flak to be safe. Grapples are a good idea as well, but not super important yet again. One more item I also like is focal chili. It just makes you run around faster, which is helpful when you're on foot especially. But the reason I'm telling you to do all these extra precautionary steps is because basically when you combine cactus broth and bug repellent and you run through a cave of any type of cave that has a bunch of bugs, none of it's going to aggro to you. The cactus broth's ability basically lets you be invisible to enemies that are not super close to you in general, and bug repellent does the same thing specifically for bugs, and these do compound, so you're really hard to see. If you go right up next to it, it will aggro you for a few seconds, but if you run far enough away, it'll de-aggro you, and the only way you're going to have to deal with any problems is if you start attacking the creatures. So basically for any cave that I describe you needing this set of items, the strategy is do not attack anything, run through the cave, ignore everything, just jump over bugs, run around bugs, do whatever you have to do. They're not going to aggro you for too long, and you're basically immortal inside of these caves because nothing's going to try to kill you. With that being said though, definitely follow the Jonah X guide or some other guide you find online for this cave. It is much easier than going through on foot. It's really not intuitive how to go through this cave. It's basically a puzzle. Let's get into the other artifacts though, because the rest are a lot easier. For the artifact of the crag, you need to go back to the lava cave like we talked about earlier in the video 2 times, and yet again, you can fly through this entire cave, so you literally just fly through the cave, go to the back of the cave, grab the artifact of the crag, make sure you don't fall in the lava here. This is something that actually happens sometimes, which is crazy because it's the only thing that you can mess up. If you don't know this, you can dismount both ways off of a Pteranodon or whatever flyer you're on if you just hold the directional key you want to dismount to. For example, if you're on keyboard, you can just hold A as you dismount and you will dismount to the left. But yeah, just grab it and fly out. That's it. For the artifact of the Destroyer and the artifact of the Cunning, you have to go inside the Snow Mountain Cave at 15.6, 27.5. This, out of all caves on the map, honestly, is probably the one you want a creature for the most because there's so many enemies in this cave that it's pretty hard to avoid all of them, and they are hard-hitting enemies. My recommendation, if you have it, is the Pyromane because it keeps you warm during it. You can go through the narrow entrance at the start because you can put it on your shoulder and then put it back out on the floor. And then you can easily run through the entire cave and get back out of the cave because going out of the cave is pretty difficult here because it's very steep unless you have a high jumping creature like a Pyromane. But if you don't have one, you can use a Deinonychus or you can just use grapples. One item you definitely need though for this cave is rare flowers. There's a ton of Purlovias in this cave, and using rare flowers makes it so Purlovias can't dismount and stun you off your creature. The reason for this is because when you have rare flowers active and you're running through the cave with them, it aggroes creatures in a different way. Basically, instead of having the Purlovia jump out and get you, it'll just climb out of the floor and run up to you to hit you instead, which is really useful because the stun is the only dangerous part about the Purlovia. The rare flowers are mainly useful if you're on a creature and you're going through killing everything. If you're on foot, you don't need rare flowers because the Purlovia shouldn't aggro you if you have cactus broth on you. With all this out of the way, let's talk about where the 2 artifacts actually are. The artifact of the Destroyer is the first one you're going to get. Basically, as you're going down this spiral path, right when you go past the waterfall, you're going to hook a left immediately. And after you hook that left, you're going to see 3 parkour jumps. Do not fall. If you fall, you will die immediately. Grab the artifact of the Destroyer and then leave. That's it. Once you're done with that first one, you need to go further down the spiral path until you find the next entrance, and that one is where you go to the artifact of the Cunning. This area here is incredibly steep. It's very dangerous. There's a lot of bears here. There's a lot of other creatures. So either you want to stay up on the cliff and shotgun down everything before you go down, or you're going to need to be very fast with grapples to go down, grab the artifact of the Cunning in the far back of the cave, and then get out as fast as you can. You definitely want grapples to get out of the cave. It is so much faster. For the artifact of the Brute and the Devourer, you have to go to the Lost Temple, which is at 46.8, 87.3. To get into the temple, you need to click the button on the left side at the bottom of the staircase here, and then you go inside. You're going to want to have grapples for this cave. It's the most important item for the cave by far, and it's literally mandatory to use grapples or a climbing pick to get to the artifact of the Devourer. I'd also recommend bringing cactus broth, bug repellent, a set of flippers. You're going to need a pickaxe for this cave, and I'd also recommend parachutes. In terms of creatures, if you are going to bring one, use the Baryonyx, but I really don't think you need one. For the sake of this video, I actually am using the Baryonyx because I think it's a little bit easier to run this cave with a Baryonyx than without one. But when I'm personally running this cave as I just play through the game, I don't use a tame for this. So here's how you run through the cave. The first artifact you're going to go for is the artifact of the Brute. First, you need to drop down the waterfall room right at the start of the cave after you go through the first door. You can stop on this crystal on the way down if you want to sort of guide your fall, and if you're on foot, just parachute down. It is worth noting that the water at the bottom of this fall does have eels in it, so you need to be holding spacebar if you're on a creature landing in the water because you want to stay at the top of the water so you don't get stunned. If you're on a parachute, use a grapple and make sure you just don't land in the water at all, because if you get stunned in the bottom of the water, it's going to hurt. Once you're out of the water, you want to wrap around here until you see this crystal-y entrance and then walk through that way. Remember, yet again, if you've consumed cactus broth and bug repellent, and your creature that you're riding also has bug repellent, you are invisible to these creatures. Just run through, do not attack them. Same idea as the spider cave. Once you go down the crystal-covered path, at the first fork, take a right, and then at the next fork, take a left into this small opening. Once you go down this narrow path, you'll find the room with the artifact of the brute. When I was here, I literally sat here for 30 minutes in single player, just single player settings being annoying. The artifact of the brute spawns in the middle of these ruins. I have no idea why it wasn't spawning, but that's where it is. If you're just trying to fight the alpha version of the boss and you don't really care about getting the artifact of the devourer, you can just go back and grapple back out of the cave and leave. That is a totally viable option. If you want the artifact of the devourer though, here's what you need to do. You basically go back on the path you came from and take the first right available. Keep going until you see the fork at this tree and take a right. There's a rock you need to break here with your pickaxe to go through, that's why you need the pickaxe, and the coordinates of this rock are 45.8, 90.1 in case you're having trouble finding it. After that, you need to follow this path until the room with water in it, wrap around the left side of the room, and then continue on this path even further. Once you get to the water here, just jump off your creature and cryopod it. You're not going to need it for the rest of the cave. You're going to want to swim through this, and once you get to the other side, you're going to see this room with a bunch of rocks, a bunch of bats, a bunch of bugs, and a pit below you. The pit below you at this point is instant death, so no pressure. Parachutes are useful in this area, by the way. That's why I told you to bring them, because you can slow your falling and give yourself more room for error with the grapples in case you're not super good with grapples. You basically need to traverse this room until you find this set of crystals on the ceiling, and then either use grapples or a climbing pick to get up to the artifact. In my opinion, grapples are far easier. The coordinates for the artifact itself are 40.8, 90.3 in case you're having trouble finding it. To get out of the cave after you get the artifact of the devourer, you just basically grapple onto one of these rocks nearby, descend a bit, look behind you, and you'll see this opening in the wall. This opening is a water exit. You basically go into it, swim back out of the cave, and you're good to go. The first set of water can have eels in it occasionally, so stay at the top of the water and don't go down until you wait a few seconds. The eels will come to the surface and then you can shotgun them. That's why you brought a shotgun. If you don't see any eels for a couple seconds, just jump in the water, swim out. Once you're out of the first section of the water, you'll see a little bit of a path and then more water. You swim again, and then you're at the entrance of the cave. You'll see here in the background video, there are two buttons you need to press. One is for this first door to get back to the main room, and then there's one to the right of the main door to exit the entire cave. The cave isn't that bad. It can be a little bit confusing, but once you've done it once, you'll never mess it up again. The artifact of the gatekeeper is finally a simple artifact for you to get. All you have to do is go deep into the red zone. You can find this artifact at 37.9, 57.8. There's two ways you can go about getting this artifact. The first way is the simple, put on a hazard suit, get a decently strong creature, maybe one from the red zone itself like a rock drake, run down to the artifact, grab it, and leave, no issues at all. The other option, which is more chaotic, but is more effective if you don't have a hazard suit and don't want to craft one, is to find a lamprey in the aberration zone. You can see on screen now the locations lamprey are spawning in the water. Let it latch onto you, and then use the temporary radiation resistance to run down into the zone, grab the artifact of the gatekeeper, and get out before the lamprey dies. The last artifact on Valguero is the artifact of the Skylord, which can be found in the White Cliff Cavern at 78.2, 90.4. All you really need for this is to grab a set of flippers, or you could even just swim without it. It doesn't really matter that much. Go into the backside of this cave in the water. You'll see this giant entrance in the backside of the pool. Then you just swim through it, find the artifact of the Skylord. There's a couple of Megalania and a couple of bugs here, but if you run fast enough, you should be fine, and then get out of the cave. The only thing that you need to worry about at all in this cave is Sarcos in the water. If you bring flippers or a baryonyx though, there's no threats. I also forgot to mention this spot earlier, but this cavern is also a really great area to farm organic polymer flowers. If you live in the Chalk Hills, this is much closer for you than any other spot. Well, you made it through all the artifacts, the resources, the creatures, you made it through the entire map, and you're ready for the boss fight. Here's all the information for the boss fight, and then I'll give you the best strategy for beating the boss after I go through the info. First, for the basic stats, Grendel's Gamma difficulty has 300k HP and gives you 90 element upon beating it. The Beta difficulty has 450k HP and gives you 255 element when you beat it. And the Alpha difficulty has 600,000 HP and gives you 520 element when you beat it. On screen now, you can see the list of all the tech engrams you unlock for all three difficulties. And let's just jump straight into the fight stages because there's 3 stages this boss cycles through very quickly. The stages of the fight are the exact same regardless of the difficulty of boss you're fighting. The only difference is the HP and the damage that Grendel itself deals. The first stage of the fight is when Grendel is jumping around like a headless chicken and it's landing where red circles appear on the ground. During this stage of the fight, it'll summon Deinonychus and Vulture minis that attack you, and regardless of difficulty of the boss, these minis will be level 500. Eventually, after Grendel has jumped around a couple times and you've dealt with the minis, he'll eventually jump up and fog the entire arena. When he fogs the entire arena, you need to use one of the 3 torches around the arena to light back up the arena so then you can get to the third stage of the fight. It's worth noting that when you hit one of these torches, the one you need to hit will be lighting up, by the way. It's very easy to see. You need to be prepared because when you hit the torch, Grendel will drop right on your head when you press the torch. For this reason, dismounting off your creature to interact with the torch is a horrible idea, and I've seen people suggest this in videos. Do not do it, it's going to get you killed. You're actually able to just hit the torch with the creature that you're riding on, and this will do the exact same thing as interacting with the torch, where it'll turn it on, and the fog will go away with Grendel dropping on you. After you do hit the torch or interact with the torch, yet again, hit the torch, do not interact with the torch, Grendel will drop, and this is the damage phase where you can actually hit the boss. It'll run around really quickly in the arena, but you can damage it, and you want to be ready to do as much damage as physically possible every time you're in this stage, because it is a randomized amount of time until he starts jumping again, and you have to go through the whole cycle before you can damage him more. One other ability of Grendel that gets kind of underrated, at least from what I've seen, is that it can regenerate HP over time, so you really want to take advantage of these damage phases, or else you might get time stalled. The minis also make this fight really one of those fights you don't want to stall out, because the vultures will try to damage you off the back of your mount, killing you, which will immediately end the fight. And the Deinonychus minis are obviously a problem because they'll bleed your army, and regardless of how strong your army is, they're going to get seriously damaged from that bleed. I do have a lot of things you can do to make this fight basically impossible to lose, but you definitely want to go in here with a good strategy and understand what you're getting yourself into, or else you're going to be in some trouble. So without further ado, here's everything you need to bring with you to beat this fight with ease. 19 Therazinos with about 17 to 20,000 HP and the rest of their stats pumped into melee. Good saddles on every single Therazino. A good saddle in my definition is at least 60 armor. You don't need to go super crazy for this boss fight, but a decent saddle will make a difference. You're going to want 1.5 to 2 stacks of veggie cakes on every single Therazino, and you're going to want 5 Wyvern or Bison milk on your Deinonychus that's not about to spoil. The reason for this is the veggie cakes give the Therazinos a lot more sustainability in the fight because they heal back up the Therazinos as they're getting bled out. And the Wyvern milk on your Deinonychus means your Deinonychus, which is much less tanky than the Therazinos, won't get bled, so you're not going to have too much of a risk of getting killed when you're on the Deinonychus. And I forgot to mention this, but you also do want a good saddle on the Deinonychus. The extra tankiness is not going to hurt you. The reason you're only putting Wyvern milk onto your Deinonychus is because the creatures that you're using in your army will not automatically eat the milk, which will prevent them from getting bled. The effects of the milk only last for 3 minutes, so you're going to have to go into your Deinonychus multiple times during the fight to refresh the milk. But there's no way you could go around to 19 different Therazinos during the fight and get them more milk every single time. So the way this fight's basically going to play out is you're going to ride the Deinonychus and you're going to have the 19 Therazinos following you the entire time. You want to have it so your Therazinos are always the ones that are attacking the boss, and you're sort of sitting back, just making sure you're getting one hit in at least every couple seconds so the boss keeps bleeding whenever you're doing damage to it. When it's in the jumping stage, just stay back. Yet again, the Deinonychus is not going to be nearly as tanky as your Therazinos that can get, first of all, more HP, and second of all, veggie cakes on them. And then for the other stages, you want to stay behind your Therazinos as well, but you do need to get in on the boss because the bleed does so much damage, it makes the fight go so much faster. The reason I recommend Therazinos, even though I initially expected Therazinos to not be the best choice for this boss, is for 2 reasons. The first reason is they're much faster than something like a Dinotherium, so you really can get around the arena much faster to stay on the boss. And secondarily, their hitboxes are much more narrow than a Dinotherium. They're also more narrow than something like a Bison, so you can much more easily slip in, do some damage to the boss, and then back out without getting stuck on your own creatures. The only other really important part here is that whenever you're riding around, make sure you're not getting hit by vultures too much. Have an extra set of flak on you too and some med brews just in case you do get hit a bit, because if you die off the back of your mount, you're screwed. That's another reason why I like the Deinonychus more than the Yudi. The Deinonychus is super fast, so the vultures do have a tough time keeping up with you. During the fog stage, do not just go over to the torch and hit the torch for the Grendel to fall on you. What you want to do is you want to get all your Therazinos around the torch before you hit the lamp, because then when Grendel drops, he's surrounded by your entire army and you can get to DPSing the boss as fast as physically possible, so you're efficient. If you do all this right, you should be able to maul through the boss on any difficulty of your choosing really easily. I do like using Uteranus for boss fights usually, but I think the bleed damage in this boss fight, especially where it's regenerating HP, and the maneuverability a Deinonychus offers compared to a Yudi is more valuable for the Grendel fight. Well, that's my entire ultimate guide for playing Ark Valguero Ascended. If you found the video useful, drop a like. It helps the channel out a ton and I really appreciate it. Thank you to my members for supporting the channel. The first member exclusive video on this channel is releasing over next weekend, so I hope you're excited for that. And if you want to see some sort of challenge or some type of video from me, leave it in the comments and I might just do it. Check out the video linked on screen now if you want to learn more about Valguero's best creatures. I'll see you there. Peace.